Last week, California's largest utility company announced plans to file for bankruptcy. Pacific Gas and Energy, commonly known as PG&E, faces $30 billion in potential liability claims due to wildfires. Investigators believe that power lines and transformers caused at least 17 of the 21 major fires in Northern California in 2017. Well, the company is also suspected in multiple fires last year, including one that killed more than 80 people in the town of Paradise. And climate change could be worsening things. Joining me now, Wall Street Journal's senior energy reporter Russell Gold. Russell's latest article calls PG&E the first major corporate casualty of climate change and says it probably won't be the last. So, Russell, can you first explain exactly how these climate conditions changed in PG&E's Northern California area leading up to these wildfires?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. In the past, fire officials in California told us that they thought of Southern California, San Diego and Los Angeles area as a fire-prone area. That's where you had the Santa Ana winds. Northern California really wasn't a concern, but in the last few years, what's happened is that the parts of Northern California have dried out. They've become more fire-prone, and the wind and windstorms have picked up. And it's really sort of been a toxic brew of those two coming together: drought, dry conditions, and winds that have created so many fires and have created such a fire-prone area.
Could they have seen this coming?
Well, they probably could have. If you look at what happened in 2007 in San Diego, there were several large fires, and the utility down there made a number of adjustments and have spent 10 years hardening and changing their grid and their system. Up to the north, PG&E really didn't. They only started a few months ago, really substantially changing their system so that it wouldn't spark as many fires. Obviously, hindsight is 2020. We look back and sort of say, well, they should have done more. The point is that they have an enormous apparatus which takes a look at what they call enterprise risk. What could go wrong? And they did not see this coming with enough time.
I mean, you're talking PG&E. This is one of the biggest companies out there. I mean, Aaron Brockovich, the whole movie, you talk about how big this corporation really is. How do you think that companies will now need to look at environmental risks moving forward?
Well, it's a great question. A lot of companies have begun to ask themselves, what type of regulatory risks do we face? What could governments do that will change the rules of the road, and how should we adjust to it? But what the PG&E situation really drives home is that they have to look at physical risk as well. What fires, what damages, what storms, what assets do we have are at risk, and what could we do that would create liability? So there's a whole new level of risk that they really have to start grappling with, and that is physical risk. What do we own that could be at risk as the climate changes?
PG&E invested more than $34 billion in long-term renewable energy contracts. In fact, one of your interviews even called them one of the most woke companies in terms of climate change. What does that say about the investment system surrounding a transition to clean energy?
Well, that's a great question. No, clearly PG&E, at the insistence of state regulators out in California, wanted to do more with renewable energy. One of the interesting things that's going to happen by the end of the month when PG&E officially enters bankruptcy, or we expect it to enter bankruptcy, is that those contracts could be torn up. Those contracts could be renegotiated. So you have this very ironic situation where one of the companies that has been most supportive of renewable energy, solar and wind, might actually turn to its partners, the developers, and say, you know what, you're going to have to take a 50% haircut. You're going to have to take a lot less money than you thought. It could be a real devastating blow to the renewable energy industry. You
talk about renewable energy in this industry, but do you see other industries suffering similar fates as PG&E?
Well, that's a great question, and I can tell you that a lot of corporate executives are asking themselves that question right now. There was a poll of corporate executives and political leaders going into Davos, and they identified climate change risk as one of the major risks, and they had never ranked it very highly before. It sort of moved up very quickly to become the #1 risk. I can tell you that companies all over the world are looking at things like, do we own assets right on close to the water that could suffer from storms? How are our supply chains? Are they going to be interrupted by a storm or by climate change? These are questions that are going on right now, and we're beginning to see some companies respond, although I have to say it is very early days.
It is very early days. Look, we cover climate change very closely here at CBSN, but I have to tell you, your story just made us, our producers here, really wake up to how this has such corporate impact. It's not just about a bunch of people on the left trying to do good for the planet, that there's significant dollars and money across this country and this world invested in this type of resource.
Absolutely. Just look at PG&E. You're going to have a major impact on shareholders, on bondholders, on renewable energy contracts. The people of California might see their electricity bills go up quite dramatically because of this. I mean, we're beginning to see some real market and very personal impacts of what's going on in the world around us. And, quite frankly, whether companies are aware of the risks or trying to stay ahead of the risk could really be a differentiating factor going forward as to which companies thrive and which ones don't.
Fascinating reporting. I want to thank you so much. Wall Street Journal senior energy reporter Russell Gold. Thank you very much, Russell.